Hey, you guys, thanks for listening into this episode on today of Tips with T. We have Mr. Chris with us. Hey, Mr. Chris, how are you doing today?
Hey T, doing so good. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being a guest on the show. So, tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, so I am a web designer and I help folks learn how to become web designers and web developers. Kind of a long story. I was a pastor for 13 years and didn't really have any plans to do anything different. But then I got a surprise one day. My wife came home and said, "Hey, I'm done with our relationship." So obviously that was pretty shocking, right? For a lot of reasons. There's the relational emotional drama, but then there was also this big like financial situation of like, she kind of wore the pants of the family. She made more money than I did, and so I had to kind of really quickly figure out a way to earn some extra income so I could provide for my three little girls as a single dad now, who is a pastor getting a nonprofit salary and all that kind of stuff. So that's when I turned to web design. A friend suggested that I check it out. Started taking some free courses online. Realized really quickly that I loved it and I had a knack for it. And then probably prematurely started telling people that I could build their websites for them. It's like a running joke with most entrepreneurs. Like they say yes before they actually know how to do what they're saying yes to. Right. So that was me. But had some friends who were patient with me and, just would stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning, just figuring it out. And so one friend turned into multiple clients, turned into even more. And, within about 18 months, I doubled the income of my full-time job, just working about 18 hours as a web designer. So
That's awesome.
fast forward maybe 4 or 5 years later, and I just kind of flipped the script. I went full-time into web design. And then I still volunteer at my church and am very active in the church community, but just trying to help folks kind of go from where I was, like struggling financially to having some thriving freelance business or web design side hustle.
That's awesome. So with all that being said, how do you feel like um, your entrepreneurship journey was for you? With all that being said, and you had to go through all that.
Yeah. I mean, probably a lot like everybody else's. There were ups and downs. There were times when I felt like throwing in the towel, especially in those early days when I had to balance not really knowing what I was doing, but also like trying to keep appearances up with my clients, like, oh, no, we're fine. I got this. I'll totally figure that out. In the back, I'm going, I have no clue how to figure that out. I have no clue what I'm doing. Right. So there were moments where I'd wake up and just have anxiety attacks all day, like lack of being able to breathe, like felt like weights were on my chest all day long as I was like figuring these things out. But really what got me through it and what I encourage people to do in their journey is to not look at the big picture. And I'm a big picture person, so this is incredibly difficult for me, right? But to look at the small incremental steps that you need to take to move forward, because it's those small incremental steps that are really going to make the big difference over a long period of time. And it's unfortunate, but as a society and as a culture, right, we only celebrate the big milestones. When somebody hits a 6-figure income or hits a 7-figure income or sells their business for millions of dollars, right? Those are the moments that are celebrated. But the moments that nobody sees in the background, where you're just working away and learning and getting frustrated and starting over and trying again and not giving up, those are the things that make the biggest difference. So my encouragement to everybody listening is to focus on those things, especially if you're in a tough season, especially if you're just getting started, because when you do that, when you just put your head down and you do the work, eventually you're going to look up and you're going to see how far you've come.
Yeah, I try to tell people, even myself, to celebrate the small wins.
Yeah.
Don't take the small wins for granted, because it is a lot, and just take it one day at a time, one step at a time, because you can get overwhelming if you try to look at the big picture.
100%.
Try to break it down so you won't get overwhelmed. But I'm so glad everything worked out for you. But a question I would like to ask is, how are you able to deal with the divorce and how to get out of, and while trying to get out of debt at the same time, because that's a lot. The
Sure.
divorce within itself is
Yeah.
stressful.
Yeah.
Myself personally, I know I've been through the divorce part, and that was just stressful for me as is. Granted, I wasn't married long, so I was only married for like a year and 3 months. However, it wasn't, we didn't have a lot of financial um debt or anything like that because we wasn't married for a long period of time. So how were you able to
Sure.
manage that?
Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry to hear about your divorce. It's the kind of thing like you never understand the pain of it until you go through it. It is just gut wrenchingly hard. And it was difficult, and it was difficult to get through emotionally. And then also, this factor of having to learn new skills, having to try to figure out a way to provide for my kids. There were a lot of things in the mixture there. So let me first give you just a little bit of a timeline. So I got a divorce, and I wasn't in a ton of debt at that point in time. I had, like a few things that I had to pay off with credit card bills and stuff like that. That all came out with the divorce. But thankfully, right before the divorce, my ex-wife and I were saving up for a house. And so that's another part of like why this just threw me off completely. I'm like, we were about to just buy a house, and then you came home and you said you were finished. So that's for another story. That's for a marriage podcast, I guess. But so then about 2 years later, I got remarried. And then in that remarriage, we had some debt to get out. And then that's what I was doing to get out of that debt. So I wasn't necessarily getting out of debt at the same time that I had gotten a divorce, which, suffice to say, I would have done that, but it was a little bit staggered. But to answer your question of like, how can you handle all of these things at the same time? Well, one of the biggest things is that I didn't do it by myself. And this is something I encourage people is, I had a community of friends that surrounded me in the midst of that struggle.
Yeah.
And I would not be where I am today if it weren't for my friends who would answer my phone calls at 1 a.m. when I'm crying, or, answer my phone call in the middle of a really hectic day for them when I was freaking out, having a panic attack and just needing somebody to kind of calm me down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So that is something I think is really undervalued when it comes to starting a business, entrepreneurship. Is finding a good group of people that is going to walk with you through the journey. And so, I've got a podcast called Self-Made Web Designer. And the joke is, like, I always tell people, I'm not self-made, like there's nothing self-made about me. If anything, I'm community made. Right. And so it's super important, especially in the toughest times, to really find people that you can connect with. And so then the question after that is, well, if I don't have that already, how do I find that? Well, you go look for it. It's as simple as that. You put yourself out there. You reach out to folks online. You look for meetup groups in your industry area. Whether it's web design or finances or whatever it is, and start building those relationships. And my encouragement is always, you show up first, right? Don't expect to show up and then like lay all your baggage on the table and expect people to be like, let's be best friends. Like that's not going to happen. Like you do that and everybody's like, whoa, this person is way too much. I need a little less. Okay.
Right.
But if you show up with the intention of like, I want to be there for you, then eventually the natural response is, well, I want to be there for you. Like that's just how it is. And that's tough, especially coming from an area of like real emotional struggle. Like you're gun shy a little bit. You're like, man, if I put myself out there, are these people going to reject me? But there's a scripture that I've always leaned on that says, love always hopes. It's 1 Corinthians 13. A lot of people say the scripture at their wedding, love always hopes. And so that's been a mantra for mine, like no matter how much I've been hurt, love always hopes. Like I'm always hopeful that I'm going to give something to somebody and it's going to be received well. And even if it isn't received, like it's still, I've done my job of giving love away. And so it's funny when you do that, when you have that approach, even if you're going through a hard struggle, it has this ability to take your mind off of your own troubles. And you're like, you're not even worried about yourself because you're thinking about somebody else, and so your problems become much smaller as you dedicate yourself to helping other people.
I'm glad you said that, because a lot of people don't know that it's important to build your community. And I found that out too, by going to therapy and mentorship. Because like with me, I'm kind of like an introvert.
Sure.
So whenever I was going through my divorce process, I realized, okay, well, I want to try therapy because I know I need to talk it out. And
Yeah.
then during the therapy, like they encourage, group sessions and finding, like you said, the other networks to where people are going through some of the same things that you're going through, so you won't feel isolated, so you won't feel like you're all alone.
Yeah.
And that helped me build my community. And then actually having a friend, a couple of friends, and like my godparents or whatever, that was very supportive, that were there for me during those hard times, that were there 3-4 o'clock in the morning if I'm crying or having a panic attack, because it's a lot to deal with when you're going through a divorce, especially when you felt like you was marrying your soulmate, your life partner, someone you took vows with. So I'm glad you did say that, because a lot of people, like, we can build our own communities if we don't have one already.
100%. Yeah. And I think it's starting to become more prevalent in marketing and business, like the emphasis on community. You have a lot of folks, a lot of major companies who are trying to create these, membership communities, and, where it's like ancillary to the actual thing that they're creating or selling. And so I'm excited about that. But I think also, you've got to be sure that you're bringing some vulnerability to it. And this is where I think a lot of people struggle, is they're afraid to bring that vulnerability. They're afraid to say, I've got this struggle. I'm really having a hard time with this. So what I've tried to do in my own podcast and in my blog and in my courses is really highlight my own struggles, because another part of being a community is realizing, like, hey, I'm not the only one that struggles with this thing. Right. And I'm of the mindset that it's not lack of skill or talent that is going to take you out of building a successful business. It's a lack of ability to move past the pain, right? And so we all reach this place in building a business where it gets really, really painful, right? Where it's like, you've got to make a decision. Am I going to keep going? Am I going to keep sludging through this without seeing a ton of results? Or am I just going to, give up the ghost and call it quits and say I did my best, right? And when that moment comes, it's almost impossible if you're by yourself, And so, finding a community, being a part of a community that can help you with those mindset things, is essential if you're going to make it. And I say this every week on my podcast, like, if you don't quit, you win, because that really is this, like, building a business. It's a long game. It is about making sure that no matter what, you keep showing up and you keep working. And that doesn't mean like you ignore the data, like if you're losing money hand over fist, like, you need to look at some stuff, right? You shouldn't, if your profit and loss is more of a loss every single month, right? That's not sustainable, so that's certainly not what I'm saying. But at the same time, I think most of us get that concept. Most of us understand, I need to be profitable. I need to pivot. I need to change things. I need to figure out how to, do this certain thing that I'm doing. But what we don't get is that we've got to have people around us that are encouraging us along the way if we're going to make it for the long haul.
All right. I completely agree with that. So what are some other things that kind of help you to balance your family, your work, your side hustle? How was you able to balance all that?
Sure. Well, just to be completely honest with you, if we're talking about vulnerability, a lot of it was just fear, like it was fear of, am I going to be able to buy groceries for my kids tomorrow? Like, am I going to be able to afford my mortgage next week? And so that fear, as much as it's not sustainable to build something out of a place of fear, that fear was a big reason why I could stay up until 2 or 3 in the morning. I can't do that now, because like things just aren't as stressful for me. Like, I've got a good income. My family's like all those issues are kind of straightened out. And so I'm in bed by 11, and that's late for most people, but that's like super early for me. Right. And so, I think that even though, the fact that it was from a place of fear is not healthy. I've seen a real common denominator in a lot of people who made big life changes like this, right? And that was that they got to a place that it was either sink or swim, right?
Mhm.
Like either I'm quitting this job and I'm going to be homeless, right? Because I hate this job. It's life sucking. It's taking everything from me and I can't stand it anymore. Or I'm going to be successful, but there's no going back, right? We've burned the bridges, we burned the ships. We're not going back to what we once were doing. So there's this like nexus level event of like, I whatever was my past, it is not going to be my future. And so a lot of people come to that breaking point. And that's the reason why, they start a new business or they go back to school to get education or they quit their job and they look for a new one. And I'm not saying, be irrational, but what I'm saying is like, you don't have to necessarily come to that place of that all or nothing place of like, I'm either going to quit my job and start something and build a successful business, or I'm just going to die, like that's not a healthy place to be. Where I came from was not a healthy place to be. You can make that decision right now, realizing that like it might come to that if you don't take this seriously enough. So I was kind of forced to take it seriously, but you have an option. And so you either have to have a really harsh reality, right? Of like, things are really bad and I want them to change. Or you have to have a really clear vision of what you want life to look like, and that vision has to be so clear that you can almost taste it, like you can feel it. And that's the thing that motivates you to stay up a few extra hours and to keep going, even when, a client just left you a voicemail where he just cussed you out, like all of that stuff that we all deal with, you've got to have some level of motivation that is just going to keep you going through what most people would be like, all right, I'm out. We can't do this anymore.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for being a guest on the show and
Yeah,
coming and sharing
absolutely.
your journey. So tell us what services you are offering now.
Yeah.
And I'm going to share the social media handles so you can tell us how we can reach you, how we can render your services if you would like. Let me get to that screen. Ooh, wrong one. Okay, here we go.
Yeah. Yeah. So my website is selfmadewebdesigner.com. And I've got a free course on there that just kind of teaches you how to become a web designer and a freelance web designer, how to find that community, like I was talking about, how to learn design and development skills, how to find your first few clients. So that's there on my website. I've got the podcast, which I'd love if people listened into, but you can also connect with me on Instagram, Chris Misterek on every single platform. But really appreciate you having me on, T. It's been fun talking.
Thank you for being a guest on the show. I highly appreciate you coming and sharing your journey. And if you guys want to get in contact with me, you can do so. My number is 910-317-0396. You can shoot me an email at contact@mjfinancial.biz. You can find me on my website at www.mjfinancial.biz. You can find this episode on Anchor, you guys, and you can also find this episode or the video on the YouTube channel for MJ Financial Management as well. And thank you once again, Chris, for being a guest on the show. I highly appreciate you. I hope our listeners will check you out and go to your website and render some of your services.
Awesome. Thank you so much, T. Good talking to you.
Nice talking to you too. And all right, you guys, we'll see you on the next episode of Tips with T.